So, meanwhile, while my decks are being retrieved and brought in, I'm going to cover. We'll get started just to be efficient on time. We'll do introductions, and I'll do some of the upfront setup before we get the actual slides. Sorry for the confusion. All right, reset, Zen. So my name is Ryan Sokolowski. I'm a senior program manager with Microsoft in the Enterprise Cloud Group, specifically on the CAT team. So the CAT team focuses on, we're the team that traditionally has run all the TAP programs. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with TAPs. We own the MVP programs. We basically focus, we're in a fairly unique position within Microsoft, and we focus on gathering feedback from our customers and driving that feedback back into engineering to make the products better. All of that has little to nothing to do with why you're here this morning. So on that front, I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer and have countless certifications. I'm sure like some of you in the room, and like some of you, you may not have any yet. So while we're getting the decks loaded up here, I'm going to go through a couple tips that I like to go through with people who are unfamiliar with certification, or it's been a while, or even people who have multiple certifications. Just kind of a show of hands, how many people in the room have taken a certification exam within the last, let's say, 18 months? Wow, okay, great. So I've also been staffing and working over on the info desk throughout the week, and I've spoken to a lot of people who have come through, and it happens every year as well. When I talk to people, people really get freaked out about the whole exam taking process. And I always encourage everybody to just kind of take deep breaths, actually try to have some fun with it. And most importantly, if you can, don't tell anybody important, particularly in your management chain, that you're taking a certification exam. That just puts undue, unnecessary pressure on you that you don't need to have. I think we can light that back up. Look at that, light it up. That wasn't even intentional. So we've got slides. So just to kind of set the stage, what we're going to do is we're going to go through, this is part one, and the next session is part two for the private cloud certifications, which is 246 and 247. We're actually going to be doing these in reverse order. So this session is primarily about 247 because, and I'll come to that a little bit later, what the context of the sessions are, just to set the stage for you if you're planning on staying for this session and or the next one. When I'm done with this little 2-minute piece, this would be your time to get up and leave if it's not what you're expecting. What we have is essentially a review of the objectives for the exam. We'll go through those a little bit, but then the bulk of this session is primarily focused on example questions. This is my second time being employed at Microsoft. After I left in 2004 and before I came back many years ago, I spent about 8 years working on actually creating Microsoft exams, writing the exam questions, not in the Canadian sense of writing the exam, which the Canadians usually mean to take the exam, but actually authoring. So I have a pretty deep background with this environment, the context. So I've got a lot of sample questions that we're going to go through. We're not going to put anybody on the spot. It's just to kind of give you a pulse. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. David saves the day. So MCSE Private Cloud Part 1. Session objectives, what we're basically going to do is hopefully help you successfully prepare to take these two exams and to provide some insight into the new item types, the questions, the formats. Takeaways, obviously, like I said, the certification exam information, as well as the topics and a lot of sample questions. So that'll be our focus. These two exams are basically a mile wide or miles wide, yards deep. So you have to know, as unique to most of the other certification exams, these exams go pretty deep into all of the different System Center products. The only one that's generally not touched on, although not exclusively, is Configuration Manager in these two exams. As you know, probably some of you I see nodding, there are separate Configuration Manager exams. So on the roadmap, this is where these two exams fit in. The precursors are obviously 410, 411, and 412, which earn you your MCSA. Those are kind of the core Windows Server 2012 exams. And then these two exams, successful completion will earn you the MCSE Private Cloud. And notably, like I said, we're going to start with 247 rather than 246, which I think helps illustrate the point as well that numbers don't mean anything on these exams. You can take these exams in any order. There's no sequence. There's no prerequisites, whatever. You could theoretically take 246 and 247 before you ever take 410, 411, 412. You could take 412 first and then go back and take 410, so on and so forth. I think most of you are generally aware of that. So where's my other, I lost my other slide. Okay, well, they've been reformatted. So the exam objectives, basically this is where I had a slide that was talking about 246 versus 247 and why we're going to cover 247 first. 247, as you can see at the top, is configuring and deploying a private cloud. So that generally happens first before you monitor and operate that private cloud, which is the title of 246. So that's why we're going to tackle this topic first. So you can see here, this is right from the exam objectives, the percentages as to the amount of coverage on each of these areas. And we're going to go through each of these five key areas and drill into each one, and then we're going to have a bunch of sample questions. So the first topic is designing and deploying System Center. And the first objective is designing a scalable System Center architecture. This encompasses planning for capacity, high availability, scalability, being able to do an assessment of your current data center environment and apply that to your design approach, identifying the proper System Center components. Some of those are kind of obvious. You're probably not going to get questions that ask you which of the System Center products manages virtual machines. So they're generally not going to be at that functional level. The second objective is installing the System Center infrastructure. So knowing what the installation prerequisites are, that's very important. Seems sort of trivial. These are things that you may do once or twice in your own organization or company. But from a testing perspective, that can be pretty key because those are fairly definitive black and white answers. Installing the components and then upgrading System Center components. If many of you have taken certification exams over the years, you know that upgrade topics, again, are always fairly interesting from an exam item writing perspective, fairly black and white again. Which versions can you upgrade to and from, and where do you have to start, and what's the order and the sequence, and so on, as well as side-by-side migration. So let's just dive into the questions, I think, yes. So the way we're going to do this, nobody's going to be put on the spot. I'm going to put the question up. I'll read through it, give everybody a minute or so to kind of internally, mentally pick your answer. Let's try not to shout it out in case someone else is still kind of cogitating on what their choice is. And then we'll go to the answer screen, and we'll talk a little bit about why it's right and what the answer is. So it's sort of fun. So the first question is, you are planning your deployment of System Center 2012 R2 Data Protection Manager. You have the following servers with the configurations shown. You must determine which servers can be used for your deployment and where the various pieces will be installed. Drag and drop the items from the top to the appropriate servers on the bottom. So I attempted to simulate a drag and drop item in a PowerPoint deck. You can let me know when we get to the next slide if I was successful. So you have where your DPM installation will be and where your DPM storage pool would be. And then you have server A, B, and C with the different volumes represented, the sizes, the type of disk, basic or dynamic, and the format of the partition. People are still staring intently. Some people have some ideas. Are you ready? Yeah. So let's see if the animation was lost with the reformatting. I apologize. There was supposed to be animation that I believe the DPM installation comes down to server B, was it? So my notes say that the DPM requires 3 gig for installation, so that would go to the D partition. I have a laser pointer, so I believe this was originally coming down to here. And then the DPM storage pool must be a dynamic disk, and I believe that was coming down to here. So, yeah, apologies. These the decks were reformatted in the 11th hour, and my animation. Oh, maybe I just, if I'm smart enough to click through it. Oh, okay. So they were both going to be. I apologize. Okay. Yeah. So just goes to show you that even someone who puts the actual question together can still look at something wrong, and yeah. Okay.
Clarified a lot of stuff for me.
Good. Thanks, guys. Sorry. So another sample question. Is this kind of fun? This is a good use of your time? Okay, good. You're planning your upgrade from System Center 2012 SP1 to System Center 2012 R2. You have the following System Center components installed in your environment. In what order must these components be upgraded? So it's really ordering all 6 of those items. And this is one of those things that if you have not done this or have not read about it, you probably aren't going to be able to guess necessarily correctly. So it is a challenging question. I have actually done this, so I've gone through it. Still, if I was going into a customer environment, I would still want to look this up on TechNet and make sure that I remembered it exactly correctly. But you're in a test environment. So no animation here, I just moved them over to the other side. So you start with Orchestrator, then go to Service Manager, DPM, Ops Manager, VMM, and then App Controller. And there is a certain logic to that, which I won't dive into here. But it gives you an example of this is the kind of question that you could potentially legitimately expect to see on the exam. So don't be offended or upset if and when you see something like this. There's a very specific order to upgrade them, the sequencing, as well as the initial component introduction. This is also that holds true for when you're doing your initial installation, not just the upgrade. And I included the link here, so yeah, hopefully you guys have access to the deck afterwards. Another sample question in this area, designing and deploying System Center. You're currently running System Center Operations Manager 2007. You need to upgrade to System Center Operations Manager 2012. Which of the following changes must you make? Choose all that apply. So if you were in this same session last year at TechEd, this is my question recycled from that. Now, this question would typically have a good deal more information that doesn't necessarily fit on a PowerPoint slide. There would generally be some illustration of server A is configured like this and it's installed like this, or server B has these pieces installed or these components. So there's a little bit of a leap of faith here, but when you see the answer, it kind of flows. Are we ready? 3, 2, 1, go. So these are the choices. So obviously enabling DHCP is clearly not in scope. Your SQL Server must be 64-bit and a minimum of SQL 2008 SP1. x86 isn't supported, 32-bit. Server 2008 R2 SP1 is the minimum supported release for hosting System Center 2012 components. And WinRM is required for System Center 2012 management servers. So again, one of those types of questions that if you've done this a number of times, you're much more familiar with it. If you haven't or are not in a position to have done this a lot, this is where your reading and studying TechNet and books will come in. Okay, moving on to our next key area, configuring System Center infrastructure. So again, this is right off of the the exam objectives from the Microsoft Learning site. So this is about configuring DPM storage pools, DPM site-to-site replication, System Center agents, management groups, data retention, orchestrator watcher nodes. I kind of have a question about that because I'm not sure that there are orchestrator watcher nodes, but that's what the objective says. So, and I've got someone nodding up here. I think those of you who know what watcher nodes are know that that's not orchestrator. Configure PKI for System Center, user roles, run as accounts, run as profiles, databases, operations manager, gateway. And then configuring portals and dashboards, obviously that's what makes it cloudy, right? That's the interface, the admin and user interfaces. So the app controller portal, service manager, self-service portal, your ops manager dashboards, including app monitoring dashboards. So with that, let's jump into some questions on these areas. I liked creating this one. I got to do some old-fashioned Active Directory diagrams. So you are planning for the deployment of a System Center 2012 R2 Operations Manager Gateway server named Server 2. The Operations Manager management group servers are joined to a domain named resources.contoso.com. You must manage and monitor client computers in fabricam.com. Fabricam is an untrusted domain. Which of the following must you do to deploy the gateway server successfully? Choose all that apply. And if you haven't taken a certification exam for a few years, the choose all that apply or select the best answer, those are back, as regardless of what you think of that. Getting close. Got a couple people nodding, a few people nodding. So something else to point out about this question. So as you can probably see pretty clearly, there's some what we call parallelism in these answers, in the answer choices. A and B are very similar to each other. C and D are very similar to each other. And E and F are very similar to each other. So I don't remember exactly how this one turns out, but here's a caution. Just because you see that doesn't necessarily mean you have to pick one of A and B, one of C and D, and one of E and F. Don't necessarily be fooled into that. Sometimes items are written that way, again, for parallelism. It's also some other things to be cautious of. It's not always the longest answer choice. It's not always answer choice C. So let's move forward and see what the answer choices are. So here, illustrative, there's no choice from E and F, so it's not one of each of the three. It's those three answer choices to do the gateway server deployment successfully. Has anybody actually done this? A couple people. Okay, great. Was that fairly intuitive to you then when you're reading that? Okay. And that's also kind of a gauge for you too, is that when you know the material, when you've done this before, the questions when you're reading them, it should another term that we use in this world is the item should telegraph that answer to you. So when you're reading the actual item at the top, you should automatically almost know what you're looking for in the answer choices before you ever start reading them. Here's another sample question. You're planning for the installation of System Center 2012 R2 Service Manager Data Warehouse Management Server. Which of the following servers will support the requirements for this installation? Choose all that apply. So this goes to your requirements. So Service Manager 2012 R2 Data Warehouse Management Server. You see 2008 R2 Enterprise and Standard, 2012 R2 Standard Enterprise, different versions of SQL, Service Pack or not. Ready? No? Too soon? Ready? Okay. So B, C, D, and F must be installed on the 64-bit edition of the Windows operating system. Enterprise versus Standard is irrelevant. So that's kind of in there as kind of distracting information. Service Manager 2012 SP1 and System Center 2012 R2 Service Manager require SQL Server 2008 R2 SP1 as the minimum. Yeah, it's because the database doesn't meet. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. The questions like this are tough because you have to seriously sit there and think and pick which ones meet or don't meet and be very analytical about it. And an item like this, is still fairly easy to get incorrect, even if you actually know the answer. It is, right. And that's where I go back to what I was talking about before we began the session about not freaking yourself out too much when you take these exams. If you're a little bit calmer and you're able to think logically and maybe even have a little bit of fun while you're taking these, this isn't the GRE. This is not going to determine your placement in college or what medical school you get into or whatever. It's a certification exam. It's serious, but don't make it more than it needs to be. You can always take it again. Yeah, and that may just be the formatting as well that I did on the slide. So, Another sample question. You administer a System Center 2012 R2 private cloud infrastructure. You must grant user 1 the ability to add Zen server hosts and clusters to a VMM cloud named Cloud 1. Which standard user role will allow user 1 to perform this task without granting more permissions than required? Minimum required permissions. So I couldn't remember how we usually phrase this, but it's the least required privileges. So this one's pretty straightforward, right? There's only one answer choice. It doesn't say choose all that apply. It's which one is the least. Now the lesson to be learned on this item is that this is a classic. So I wrote this one on purpose. So does that give anybody any clues? Ready? So it is administrator. So just because it says the least permissions doesn't mean it has to be one of those roles that has less permissions. It's simply you have to be a full-blown admin in VMM to be able to add Zen server hosts and clusters. Now, show of hands, how many people, because I'm going to put my hand down, I've never done it. How many people have ever done that? Zen server, no.
Zen server? Yes.
Oh, you have? Wonderful.
Zen server no.
Okay. So as the note says there, only administrators can add Zen server hosts or clusters known as pools under VMM management. The same thing applies actually to adding WSUS servers to VMM for Fabric updates. So that might be a little bit more realistic question because more people have probably done that. So those are the kinds of areas that, a takeaway on that is that those are the kinds of areas where even though you know the product, even though you've spent X amount of time with the different products, the components, that's the kind of area where you might want to concentrate and focus a little bit of your study because those are very clear black and white answers. It's very easy to write an item around something like that because this is 100% right and all the other answer choices are 100% wrong. All right, another sample question. You have a server in a DMZ that you would like to manage using System Center 2012 R2 Operations Manager. What port or ports do you need to open? Choose all that apply. And this is a little bit of a reading comprehension. Two people nodding, 3. How positive are you? Pretty positive? Not at all. Okay, one guy's actually going to come up here and take mic number 2 and tell you his answers, and the other guy is not. No, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. This is all just for fun. Ready? So, port numbers are easily found trivia. I don't know if they're necessarily trivia, but this is totally fair game. Expect to know things like this. It's also, like I said here, directly applicable to deploying an Operations Manager gateway server. The one note or the caveat that I will make here is you will generally not, I can't say categorically never, but generally not, you will not see a choose all that apply that has a single answer. I have personally not seen one myself, I don't believe. So that was a little bit unfair to make that a choose all that apply. But
But like you said, I intentionally picked another one, and compromise it as not necessarily because it's choose all apply. Like 42.
yeah. Well, so if one of your answer choices was B, then yeah, then you essentially got it right, because like I said, I kind of forced the issue on this question. Some of these questions I wrote for the opportunity to actually talk about some of these things as well.
But it's the same on the exam.
What's that?
It's the same on the exam. You can also have that the questions choose all that apply, or there is only one answer.
That is possible. Yes, I don't know. I don't know if you would generally see that. Is what I was saying before. Yeah, there could be a choose all that apply with 6 answer choices like this, where it might really only be one. I would generally think not, but I mean, go with your gut. I mean, apply your instincts and your knowledge to it. Do it from a logistical, logical perspective. You know, if you know, he knew categorically that it was only B, so he was only going to answer B. So good. Okay, you guys are doing well. Configuring the fabric. This is one of my favorite areas. So we've got 4 primary objectives here: configuring the storage fabric, network fabric, deployment of update servers, and then clouds and virtualization hosts. So under storage fabric, you have classification of storage and pools, providers, arrays, file server cluster, storage pools, and file shares. This is an area I generally find people don't understand quite maybe as well as they should or they could. As well as this next one, configuring the network fabric. I know large organizations that I work with who use VMM. They do nothing in the network space. They don't understand logical networks. They don't do any HNV, NVGRE, none of that stuff. It's whoop over their heads. Not that it's not within their wheelhouse. They could understand it. They just haven't taken the time. So logical networks, VM networks, IP and Mac resource pools, VIP templates, load balancing, logical switches, network isolation, including, like I just said, network virtualization. So HNV, NVGRE. If you don't know what those acronyms are, you look those up. You familiarize yourself with them. Private VLANs and VLANs. What was I just going to touch on? Oh, like IP and Mac resource pools. That's actually like a real world thing. If you're in an organization and you're deploying multiple VMM instances, you have to know that each installation of VMM uses the same default Mac pools, and you have to change that. Otherwise, you will have the weirdest problems that you will almost certainly never be able to troubleshoot or figure out, because you'll have duplicate MAC addresses and IPs from different VMM installations that you'll have a really hard time tracing back. Configuring the deployment of update servers, integrating Windows Server Update Services, WSUS server, into the VMM fabric. How many people in here have done that? That counts, sure. He said lab environment. Configuring and managing a library server. How many people have done that in a highly available VMM environment and know the difference? Okay. That's probably something to go look up. If I don't have a question on that, remind me and I'll come back and touch on that for 30 seconds. Integrating WDS and Pixie into the virtual machine manager fabric, and doing virtualization host deployment. So deploying your Hyper-V servers using physical computer profiles. Configuring clouds and host groups, and virtualization hosts. This is all just what's up on the website. It's good to touch on it just as an overview, and then we'll dive into some fun questions here. Hopefully they're fun. Your company uses a custom installation package named package ABC for a business application. You need to make this available as an available resource in VMM to be indexed and used. What should you do? One guy nodding. Somebody going like this. So, couple things here as you're just finishing reading up. I know we all read at different paces. All of these things, all of these answers are completely possible and feasible. You can do all of these things, right? So that's what makes them all excellent distractors, is what we call them. Not all of them, because obviously one of them is the right answer. So if you have, has anybody done this before? So the key to this whole question is which word? Index, bingo. So I didn't know this before I did it the first time. It's one of those things that I just kind of picked it up through tribal knowledge. I'm sure it's documented somewhere, but it is answer choice C, CR. So the folder extension of .cr means that it's a custom resource. And that's the way to get something in your VMM library indexed and available for use within VMM. So custom resources enable you to store resources in the library that otherwise would not be indexed and have them show up as available resources by the library server. User creates a folder with a CR extension. Folder contents will be available to all users who can access the share, and VMM will discover and import the folder into the library as a custom resource. How many people got that one? Yes, no, I take it back. I told you I wasn't going to put you on the spot. So that was a little tricky. Next question. You have a 3-node cluster. You must configure this cluster to provide uninterrupted access to virtual machine files and configurations for a group of Hyper-V compute nodes. Choose the best answer. I probably should say, what should you do? Choose the best answer. I was saving space on the slide. So this really should be one of those 30-second questions that when you get it, and I apologize, I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad. You want to read the whole question, right? But what I was talking about before about the notion of telegraphing. So when you read the text, the context of what's in the question, that should automatically telegraph to you so that, if you covered all this nonsense up and you just read the actual item, you should know. I would know. I think reading this item on an exam, exactly what answer choice I'm looking for. And I'm just going to scan the list and boom, oh, there it is. That's what I was looking for. That's the notion of telegraphing. So, and the key word here is this, uninterrupted. So uninterrupted access immediately equals what? Anybody want to? No one. Okay. Scale out file server role. So best answer is SOFS, and the note here is that storage spaces is not scale out file server, and you should definitely know the difference and why those are not the same thing. Related, complementary, certainly not the same thing. No, when you configure scale out file server role, and you can do this yourself actually with just a couple of VMs, cluster 2 VMs, install the scale out file server role, and what it does is the client access point is actually made highly available, so you have continuous availability.
But this is after the fact, cluster one, then you want to come back and add that in after.
Right. Yeah, so you're adding in you're configuring the scale out file server role, whether it's in a VM or on the physical nodes. Everybody solid with that? Okay. Another question. You have an existing WSUS infrastructure and are now adding System Center 2012 to your environment. What should you do to control host updates in your private cloud? Choose all that apply and order them. This is where I asked you guys before how many people have done this, and I think no one said I had. We good? Close? So if you've done this before, you can kind of decipher this and decode it. If you haven't, you either just have to know it or have read about it. And some of it is kind of logical. When you see the answer, it'll kind of make sense to you. So the first thing you do is you add the WSUS infrastructure to VMM. The next thing is create an update baseline. Then you scan for baseline compliance of your environment using VMM, and then you do your remediation. And the note there is that this, it's certainly a feature of VMM, and you should know how that works and why. Any questions about that? Everybody good? Okay, I think I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. I don't know exactly how we're doing on time. So configure private cloud integration. So this is our configure System Center integration, which encompasses private cloud integration and then the integration of private and public clouds. So the first area, private cloud integration, deals with Ops Manager connectors, Orchestrator IPs, integration packs, Service Manager connectors, SharePoint integration, IPAM server integration, and App Controller. Anybody in here ever use IPAM? Okay. Tried it once. And then integration of private and public clouds deals with the configuration and deployment of SPF, Service Provider Framework, and Microsoft Azure Pack for Windows Server, Windows Azure Pack, or WAP. So you have installed the default deployment of Service Provider Foundation 2012 R2 along with the Windows Azure Pack Express deployment. SPF is installed on server1.contoso.com. Windows Azure Pack is installed on server2.contoso.com. You must identify the proper method of accessing the admin web service. Select the best answer. Is this just jumping out at anybody? How many WAP experts do we have in here? Okay. Get some indication. So what I would do with this item is I'd read the question, and then I'd scan the answer choices, and I'd go back and I'd read the question again. Make sure you understand exactly what the question is asking. And the note here is that if you know the WAP environment, reread those last 3 words before the red, select the best answer. Admin web service, not the admin portal. See, if I was blasting through this exam, I would have read this question and said, oh, well, that's the admin portal. That's what they're asking. And I would choose the wrong answer. So the answer is A. So it's about understanding the path, what the URL is to get to that admin web service. 443 is required, B and D, so those are obviously out of the mix. So you can go through process of elimination is what I'm explaining here too. C and D are the VMM web service. You can see that in the path, right? Everybody? VMM versus admin. And again, that's done for parallelism. E is the WAP admin portal. And again, if I'm blasting through that exam because I've got an appointment I got to go to, I would have answered E if I misread it. And then F is the WAP tenant portal. So I think there's a lot you can learn from that sample question right there. Here's another one. You have a custom line of business application running in your private cloud. It uses a business service running in WCF, an Oracle database on Solaris, and a web front end written in ASP.NET. What should you do to monitor the application? That's why I like this question, and I made it D, because I know when people have read all the answer choices when they get to that. Well, yeah, it's clearly D, right? Rip the Oracle out. No, it's just I'll comment about this as you're still working through. I mean, some people do have that belief, that concept that would be, and for people listening to the recording after the fact, I'm doing air quotes, but some people would believe that D is the Microsoft answer, replace the, it's not. So just don't be misled or pulled down a certain path or led astray by things like that. Everybody got an answer? Whether it's the right one or not remains to be seen right now. So you use the distributed application designer to model the monitoring of the application. The note at the bottom is System Center 2012 includes support for multi-layer applications, and we should know what's involved in monitoring line of business applications. That's a great representative question, again, because it's dealing with Oracle on Solaris and blah, blah, blah. So it's just what it is. Configuring and deploying virtual machines and services. We've got 4 primary objectives here. Configuring profiles, so understanding and knowing deeply the difference and the distinctions around physical computer profiles, guest operating system profiles, hardware profiles, SQL Server profiles, app profiles, and capability profiles. So spend some time in your VMM console and work through this stuff. Creating and configuring server app V packages, know how to sequence an application, configure app V package settings, and configuring and deploying a server app V agent. This is one of those areas that unless you've done it, and I think I did it once, like 5 years ago at a customer site. So my knowledge about app V is extremely minimal. Be something I would have to go back and brush up on, read, make sure that I'm prepared at least. Configuring and deploying a service, importing and exporting templates, configuring VMM templates, service templates, SQL DAC packages, web deploy packages, server app V, pre-install, post-install, and first VM when created scripts. How many people in here, just show of hands, have ever done either SQL DAC or web deploy? Wow. Okay. Just because you haven't done it, that doesn't make you any less of a uber administrator or architect or engineer. It's just one of those takeaways that because this is listed on the exam objectives, it's something that you should probably just go touch on in TechNet, your study materials, your practice questions, what have you. And then updating a service, so applying updates to existing VMs that are in place, deploying new VMs with updated settings. What do you read that as? Offline updates, yeah. Updating, replacing the operating system, apps, SQL, scaling out service tiers. That's another area I find is generally underrepresented in general VMM knowledge, for example, is people's grasp or understanding of service templates and how powerful those are. The ability to do 2, 3-tier applications and do multiple nodes at the same time. So let's jump into some sample questions and see what we touch on here. You're currently planning your private cloud deployment. You wish to include SQL Server VMs in the library for deployment. What must you do to the SQL Server VMs in order to create a SQL Server profile? I don't really like this question. I wrote it, but I don't really like it. I apologize. You'll see why. Ready? That's why I don't like it. Because you have to install SQL Server 2008 R2 or SP2, right? Because they have to be SQL Server. No, because I have the service pack on it. Gotcha. That's why that's not there. So you have to create a sysprep version. I didn't have any version information in the item stem, so it's a fairly poor question. Because you would generally install SQL and then you would create your sysprep version of it. But the takeaway here is that you have to know how to deploy the various types of VMs that are required in an automated environment to have those available. Sample question. This one I like. You have 2 VMs named VM1 and VM2. VM1 and VM2 run as highly available VMs on a cluster named Cluster 1. You with me so far? Yeah. Cluster 1 consists of Server 1 and Server 2. You use System Center 2012 R2 components to manage your environment. You must ensure that VM1 and VM2 are not both affected in the event of the outage of server 1 or server 2. What must you configure? Select the best answer. So there's a lot of setup there, but I see people nodding already. Again, deliberately written in such a way, you have to have all the context there so that the question is legitimate, valid, not challengeable. But as you are reading through it, this should telegraph to you. Ready? Virtual Machine Manager availability sets. So that's just black and white. That's what the best answer is. Moving forward, which of the following on-installation components are supported by Server App V? I guarantee you right here I get this question wrong if I see this. You guys want to spend any more time on this? No? Okay. I agree. Server App V supports many but not all possible installation results for server applications. Microsoft expects you to use it for many application scenarios, however, so you should know when it's possible to use it. This is a perfect example of something that I knew little to nothing about, but I wanted to write an item about Server App V, so I went to TechNet and found something that was fairly definitive in black and white. This is what it supports. This is what it doesn't. I threw in a couple other things that were random. Boom, there's your question. So it's kind of a garbage question, but fully within the realm of possibility of what you could potentially see on an exam. And I'm certainly not implying that the items on the exams are of this low, substandard, subpar quality. They certainly aren't, but again, most of these questions were written very deliberately to illustrate certain points. Well, we are ahead of time. I thought I had another whole section. So, session objectives, hopefully this will help you successfully prepare, get an idea of what to expect on these two exams, provide some insight into the new question types, the formats. I'm going to come back to that before we wrap up. Takeaways you can see on the screen. So one of the new item types or formats that I certainly didn't invest any time in here are the case studies. Show of hands, case studies. Yeah, they're your favorite, right? Let me give you a tip about the case studies. I'll give you some exam taking tips. We touched on this at the beginning. Don't take these exams too seriously. Don't tell your manager or your spouse or your dog that you're taking these exams. Don't put that pressure on yourself unless you absolutely have to. I know most of you probably are reimbursed for your exams by your employer. Try to figure out a way to take the exam and pass it before you let someone know that you have incurred the expense. It just reduces a little bit of the stress on you. Day of the exam, 30 minutes before you take the exam. If it's within your capability, drink a cup of coffee. Some people don't drink caffeine or coffee or whatever. Seriously, drink a cup of coffee. It can have a mild effect. It can actually help. Chew gum when you're taking the exam. The studies have shown that the act of actually chewing gum increases blood flow to the brain and can help you think a little bit clearer. Sounds silly. I mean, do some jumping jacks before you go into the room. Not to get your blood pressure up. You know, I'm certainly in that camp, but get kind of pumped up for it so that you're active, thinking about it, and to kind of reduce some of the stress. I mean, I have a blast taking certification exams, because I really don't care if I'm going to pass it or fail it. I mean, I do, certainly, right? We all do at some level, but don't put too much pressure on yourself. Case study questions. The best way to do case study questions, is everybody pretty much familiar with how that works? How those, It's a case study, so it's what it sounds like. It's not what we just went through. They're not multiple choices where you have a small paragraph and then pick your answers. It is a story with generally multiple tabs, and here's the network topology, and here's the security requirements for Contoso.com, and here's all this other stuff. So the first thing you do when you get a case study question, what is the first thing you do? Read the case study? No. Do not read the case study first. You want to read the case study, but not first. First thing you do is you go to the first question. So go immediately, when you get a case study, go to the first question, read the question. It says, you must blah, 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 what must you do to meet these requirements? Now go back and read the case study, because now you have a purpose for reading the case study. You have a goal and an objective that you're reading it with that in mind. Otherwise, you're going to read it the first time. That's a mistake some people make, particularly if you're a little bit slower reader or a little bit more methodical and you have trouble with time on exams. Don't read that case study first, because you might run out of time. Read it with a purpose, that you're solving a problem. You're all engineers. I'm just going to make the leap that you're all probably engineers or architects. So do it from that approach. There was something on one of the earlier slides that I said I was going to come back to and talk about. Does anybody remember what that was? Sure, we could talk about. I don't know if that was it or not. So when you deploy, he said VMM in an HA environment. Yeah, the library. So how many people in here know what that difference is or distinction? So when you install VMM normally, like just not HA, single instance, you have the option to it just automatically creates your MS VMM library share, right? That does not work in a clustered environment, obviously in an HA environment. So you have to go back through later and create a library share and make that available to your VMM environment. Does everybody follow that? Get that? Okay. Was that what it was? Was it? Okay. Well, we've actually got a little bit of extra time, so I apologize for the slight delay at the beginning with the slides. I have my slides for the next session, so for those who are going to stick around for the next one, please do. And again, the takeaway here is these exams, the key point is I would probably recommend that you take 247. If you haven't taken either of these yet, I would probably recommend take 247 first. That's the configure and deploy. So that's pretty much the topics that we just went through here. Because it sort of flows logically, at least in our minds. You have to configure and deploy something first before you can monitor and operate it. And there's a lot of similarities between the exams, but when you take them, you will see there's more of these topics on this exam. And for the next session, we're going to go through 246, and there's a little bit different focus there, certainly, from a monitoring and operating perspective. But I frankly think that these are two of our more challenging exams, because you are addressing and dealing with all of the System Center components, generally minus Configuration Manager. I think there may be some peripheral touch points around Configuration Manager knowledge on the exams, but generally, because there are separate exams for Configuration Manager, these two exams are not super deep on that. How many people in here have done a lot with WAP or Service Provider Foundation, SPF? Okay, so that's the future, which by future I mean, as of like 2 years ago. So ever since that has been out, that is pretty much the direction and the future of our private cloud platform. If anybody has seen CPS on the show floor, the Cloud Platform System, that is all built. That is basically Microsoft's pre-configured, pre-validated private cloud solution. And that's the Azure in a box. in very crude terms, and that is all built around Service Provider Foundation and Windows Azure PAC. It does not use the Service Manager self-service portal, or there's no app controller in it. So these exams were originally written in a slightly different era, and I don't mean to make it sound like it was 40 years ago, but as technology progresses, and that's why you do see there is some introduction now here of SPF and Windows Azure PAC topics here, just to sort of reflect that that's kind of the new direction. Yeah.
I have a question. So with these exams where, it started with 2012 and then it started, adding in the 2012 R2.
Mm-hmm.
As there are some differences in the technology, how does Microsoft want us to prepare for the exams when it does cover across the two versions and there are differences?
That's a great question. So the question for those who may not have heard in the back, he was asking, as I was actually just perfect segue, as I was just talking about, that these exams were originally made available when it was simply System Center 2012, full stop, not R2. So yeah, exams are based off of popularity and demand and new releases in products and ship cycles and so on. Exams are periodically refreshed. And what that generally means, without getting too into it, because I have to be careful of, that's why I generally don't blog or talk to customers about new technologies, because I never remember what I'm allowed to discuss or not. So I don't want to have any NDA violations. The Microsoft Learning Team will refresh exams, and they will have a new pool or a new set of questions. A group of questions will be rewritten or written and then inserted into the existing pool of questions. And maybe sometimes they'll retire some of the older questions. There's all sorts of variability and possibilities there. But that was something that I was actually made aware of. I've been presenting these sessions at most of our major conferences. I think I was made aware of that, was it at last Tech Ed or the 2 Tech Eds ago? Because I hadn't taken these exams, obviously, since they first came out. So I wasn't aware that they had R2 content on them. Now, again, that said, if I was writing exam questions and I was asked to write some items for a new set or a new pool to go, or a new set of questions to go into that pool, I would immediately be going, please let me write the questions that are about 2012 to 2012 R2 and the differences, right? Because again, that's ripe. That's a ripe area for questions, distinctions, knowing the difference. So it is a little bit more. I had a gentleman come up to me yesterday and ask me about the Azure exams, because as you all know, Azure changes like every 14 minutes, right? Not literally, but it changes pretty frequently. And he was asking about, should I wait until the next version, the next release of Azure, and the next batch of exams? And I said, well, what you have to understand is that these exams take a certain amount of time to write, to be created, and the Azure exams that you take today may have been based off of what Azure was 9 months ago, 12 months ago. So you have to trust a little bit in the system that the exams are updated and reflect fairly current capabilities and so on. It's also a good takeaway that when a new exam comes out, I always strongly recommend people to try to take that exam as soon as possible and not wait. Because this sort of thing can happen. If you were deeply familiar with System Center 2012, and that's where you did all your work, and then R2 came out, but your customers or your organization or whatever, you were still doing 2012, you may not have the new capabilities, the new understanding of what's different or new in 2012, R2, to take that exam once that gets refreshed. So I encourage people to take those exams right away. Any other questions about the exam process, item types?
The minimum score is still 700.
Yes, the minimum score is 700, which really means nothing. Okay, that's not 70%. Everybody still thinks that. That is a normalized score. So I've done a lot of work with Microsoft's psychometrician as well, and I know her fairly well, and that's a persistent challenge that we have. Everybody thinks that means 70%, and it certainly doesn't.
Not every question has the same amount of points.
Thank you for asking that. He said not every question has the same amount of points. That is incorrect. That's another fantastic myth. Every single question is exactly the same in terms of weight. There's no weighting difference. Yes. Every single question is worth exactly the same amount. They are equal and equivalent. You get no partial credit. Yeah, so put your hands down. I know where you guys are going. Yeah. No, if it's a choose all that apply and the right answer is 4 items and you get 3 of them, sorry, pal. You had to get all 4. So it's an all or nothing. It's 100. It's like pass fail, right? You either pass that question or you fail that question. All the items are worth exactly the same amount. It's not 70%. The 700 is actually a very complex. Does anybody generally understand what a psychometrician is? Okay. You can go to Born to Learn, do a Bing search for Born to Learn, and you can go to the Microsoft Learning blog, and her name is Liberty, and she has a lot of entries on there. You can learn way more than you probably ever wanted to know about the exam process and all the science and everything behind it. So she's basically the the science person behind all the exam logic. So it's a very complex calculation to arrive at 700. It's all normalized. So there was another question.
Yeah. Do some questions have 0 weight?
Do some questions have 0 weight?
In other words, are there sample questions other that are not part of the grading process?
That's what I was trying to process and put into terms. So he said, are there sample questions that are included and not part of the grading process? I believe that is possible. I believe that there are. Sometimes they will introduce a question or two that they're floating to try out, see how it responds. And again, I believe that all goes into some of the science of the arriving at 700. It's not to have a throwaway question for you, and you'll have no indication, right? So when you're taking the exam, however many questions you get, your goal, obviously, you want to try to get all of them right. But and the other thing too is I've seen a lot of people have a lot of pride about, I got a 948 on this exam. If you got a 701, that's just as cool as a 948 because you got a 701. Although I did hear this week somebody got, I think, a 698 or a 690.
I've gotten a 696 before.
Have you? Yeah. Now that you say that number, I think I did too many, many years ago. That rings a bell. But I mean, that just tells you that maybe you just weren't on your game at that point or whatever. So the other pitch I'll make, we've got literally 1 minute left, is that if you register for an exam here at Ignite, we're offering a 50% off discount, which can be pretty significant depending on where you live. And then we're also offering, along with that, second shot opportunity. So that's a huge deal. And it perhaps lets you do what I was encouraging you to do before, which is put it on your own personal credit card and don't tell your boss. It's $75. You get 2 shots at it. I think the second attempt, if you don't pass the first time, I think you have to use that before the end of May. But then by the end of May, then you can go to your boss and say, hey, I passed this exam. Here's my expense report. Right? That's the way to do I have some people laughing, but honestly, I've been I've talked to some people, even some people internally at Microsoft, who get way too freaked out because they're worried about their manager finding out that they didn't pass an exam.
Yeah, we can't do anything before we get permission.
Oh. Well, you can with your own credit card,
Oh, yeah.
right?
You can't get reimbursed.
Oh. Yeah, so sometimes you're stuck in that situation. So anyway, with that, we're 6 seconds over. Thank you very much. We're going to take about a 15-minute break, and then we're going to dive into 646. Thank you.